Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, an opportunity for you to hear some of the things that have been taking place this week, and also to look ahead to some very important news items that you need to know about. Looking at this from a Christian point of view, and we're going to spend a fair amount of time this morning and this afternoon as we talk about this issue of what pastors in Houston have faced. We have Kelly Shackelford back from that press conference. You're going to have a chance to watch, if you're online, the actual press conference. We're going to play some excerpts from that, or else you can listen to those. And by the way, if you'd like to see those later, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. Of course, if you're watching, we have our live cast, so you can watch what is happening in studio, so we certainly encourage you to do that. Of course, we're going to be talking about Ebola. That will be a very significant set of issues that we will address, and I've even put out a 5-point plan that I think needs to be implemented if we're going to actually deal with this crisis. And of course, we're in the midst of election 2014, so we're going to look at some of those questions as well. So many things to talk about. Do our best to try to cover that in the next 2 hours. Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. Penna, as always, lots to talk about.
Well, I know you've been talking about what happened in Houston and this idea that pastors' sermons would be subpoenaed on the orders of a government. And it sounds like the mayor is backing down a little bit on it, or even saying maybe she didn't mean to ask for the sermons. So, I think that this is a big topic of discussion today, and it points up again in a big way to me. I've been pondering it all week about the homosexual agenda, where they're asking for just equal treatment or tolerance or whatever. We are so beyond that now.
Yes.
We are so beyond. This is a spear. It's a knife that's cutting into our religious liberties if we allow it to happen. And fortunately, we've got some real warriors, one sitting at our table, that are fighting this and not allowing it to happen.
We talked a little bit about that yesterday with Peter LaBarbera, because as we've encouraged some of our listeners to pray for the trial that he'll be a part of on October 30th, that's in Canada, and certainly we then, of course, cycled back to the city of Houston and what was happening. Our own Kelly Shackelford is here back from that press conference. We're going to have a chance to hear some of the things that Ted Cruz said, Senator Ted Cruz, as well as Kelly Shackelford, but I was very impressed as people watched this video about the number of pastors that gathered around you and the reason that you felt it was so important to have that press conference yesterday.
It was really encouraging. I think it's one of those things you wish all the Point of View listeners could have been there. I know there were some there, I'm sure.
Yes.
But it was not only standing room only, it was so full that they actually had an overflow room for people to go into to watch. And there were pastors of, all different backgrounds, faiths, races, whatever. They were all standing in solidarity, and so it was a very energetic. I think it's very clear that the mayor did something that pretty much almost every American disagrees with, and and whether they're liberal or conservative or whatever, they said this is not something we do in this country.
Well, I do want to get into some of the details, but I thought just to give people a little bit of a feel for what that was like, let's first hear just a few of the comments from Senator Ted Cruz at that press conference.
Centuries ago, by people fleeing and seeking a land where you do not need to seek the permission of a king or queen or president or mayor. to preach the Word of God. Caesar has no jurisdiction over the pulpit. And when you subpoena one pastor, you subpoena every pastor.
No government.
Share button, put it on your own Facebook page or blog and to educate some people. But, Penna, I was very encouraged by some of the comments by Senator Ted Cruz.
I love what he said. Caesar has no jurisdiction over the pulpit. And just to quickly recap, in case someone really doesn't know this story at all.
Sure.
You know, we have talked over the months about this bill in Houston, sort of for non-discrimination. And it adds sexual orientation and gender identity to the non-discrimination statutes. And it's a bathroom bill. It's one of those controversial bathroom bills, which is the worst part of it, the worst repercussion of it, that would allow people to go into bathrooms dressed as the opposite sex, and it poses all kinds of danger. And the people have been up in arms there. So there's been a petition drive. And they had to get signatures, and they got 50,000 or so signatures. You needed 17,000. And some city official has disqualified 38,000 petitions on things like, oh, this was written in cursive or not printed or whatever, just reasons that don't have anything to do with the issue. So that's one. So what they want to do is squelch the opposition, and the mayor has been at the head of it. And so her attorneys then subpoenaed the sermons of pastors who were speaking in opposition to this or encouraging their congregations to be involved in the battle. This is what we ask people at Point of View to do all the time, and we applaud pastors who get involved and help their people get involved in these issues that are important. So, but now that they're doing it in the Bible Belt in Texas, we have seen the subpoena of all their sermons, and that's got everybody, going down to Houston and really focusing on this.
Kelly, I got to ask you a question. First of all, they wanted the sermons. They also wanted other communication and things of that nature. And I think most people, I've even had some statements I've seen from Americans for the Separation of Church and State and others criticizing that. I think all of them say this would not stand constitutional muster. So you have to say, why did they do it? If they wanted the sermons, some of us have suggested maybe they could go to those churches and hear the messages, but they can get those online. It seems this had a lot to do with political interpretation. Am I right on that or not?
Yeah. First, look, I'm holding, because some people think we're characterizing this. I mean, I'm holding the subpoena in my hand. It says,
yes, there it is.
This is what they demand: all sermons related to homosexuality. I mean, that's part of it. There's a lot of things, but it specifically asks for the pastor's sermons. So you have the government here demanding by force of contempt of court, which means you could be thrown into jail,
right,
that you turn over your sermons and all your private communications with your congregation. And of course, the pastors are like, what?
Yes.
I mean, incredible. And so you ask yourself, well, is this, why are they asking for this information, which is your question? Well, the answer you would think, if somebody was at least had a good motivation, was they thought they were going to get something that would help in the case. This case is about how many signatures were on the petition.
Right.
What does that have to do with what a pastor says in their sermons? Nothing.
Zero.
It has zero relevance. And so the mayor gave it away when she first said, I didn't know about these. Later that night on her own Twitter page, she said, well, the pastors are the ones who spoke out on these issues, and therefore they are, quote, fair game. Fair game. So obviously this is an attempt to abuse the process, to try to intimidate and flog her political opponents, people who didn't agree with her on a piece of legislation. So it's even worse than violating the Constitution. It was intentionally done as a way to punish people who dared to get involved in the political process.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to have a chance to hear a little bit of what Kelly Shackelford said at that press conference. A little bit later, I'd love to get your thoughts. Pastors, are you ready to send your sermons to your mayor or anybody else? We'll talk about that right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
The influence William Shakespeare had on the English language is well known. In a previous commentary, I talked about the number of words he created or coined. He is also responsible for so many everyday phrases we use. Christina Sturmbentz provides the context for these phrases we often use and forget were from Shakespeare. When we use the phrase catch a cold, we mean that we're getting sick. In one of Shakespeare's lesser-known plays, someone says that he should head straight away for Britain, lest the bargain should catch cold and starve. In other words, if the deal takes too long, it will fall apart. This came to eventually mean someone would get sick. If you say it's all Greek to me, well, you're referring back to a scene in Julius Caesar. Cassius doesn't understand because he doesn't speak Greek. Today it means that you don't understand something because it is foreign or confusing. Someone who is able to take advantage of life's opportunities may have someone say, "The world is your oyster." That phrase of Shakespeare comes from the Merry Wives of Windsor. You have probably had someone say that love is blind. You may not know that the phrase appears in The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare. Jessica says that love is blind and lovers cannot see the petty follies that themselves commit. Lovers often have the inability to see shortcomings in the one that they love. Someone might say that you have a heart of gold. Well, they're using a phrase from Shakespeare found in Henry V. King Henry disguises himself as a commoner and asks Pistol if he considers himself a better man than the king, and answers using that now common phrase. In order to start a conversation with someone, we explain that we need to break the ice. That phrase can be found in Shakespeare's Taming the Shrew, and if you express your emotions too freely, someone might say that you wear your heart on your sleeve. We find that phrase in Shakespeare's Othello. As we can see, we owe so much of our English language and common everyday phrases to William Shakespeare. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. At the moment, we're talking about the Houston pastors and that press conference. And Penna, you were explaining again the idea of this Houston's bathroom bill, the fact that they invalidated these signatures. I'm really encouraged to see pastors from so many different denominations standing behind Ted Cruz and Kelly Shackelford.
So am I.
That was encouraging.
It is encouraging. Pastors sometimes are reticent to get involved in these issues, and it's good to see them take leadership in their city and, in what's going on there. And, I love sometimes the turns of phrase that Family Research Council had. They said the mayor made it quite clear throughout the entire bathroom bill debate that she'll use her bully pulpit to bully pulpits across Houston. Yeah. And that's what she's been doing. And so, we're looking at it. We're sitting in Texas. A lot of times these issues are here. We fight them because we have so many believers here and politically active conservatives. And that's a good thing. And then, so the pastors, maybe they don't feel as intimidated for getting involved because they know that their congregations are disposed that way. But it may not always be the case in other states. It takes the pastor to take real leadership on an issue like this. And we really do want to encourage it. And, as this thing plays out, and I think our side will win, for them to see that. And to see that, when you are right and you're on the side of morality and right, and it's best for your city, you should get involved. You should step up and do it. And, if you're worried about your people leaving your congregation, that's not what you should be worrying about. You should be worrying about what God would have you do.
Kelly, is this a lawless act? Because we've talked about the fact that the mayor and her attorney, just threw those out. But is that the procedure used in Houston?
The law is very clear that it's the city secretary that determines and certifies the signatures. She certified that there were well over enough signatures. That's it. It goes on the ballot. But the mayor and the city attorney just decided that, undaunted by the law, they would throw it out and say they're invalid. So, I mean, it's just complete lawlessness. So then it doesn't surprise you too much, although it still does surprise you, that the same people who don't seem to care about the law would then issue subpoenas to pastors. These pastors aren't a part of the lawsuit. Okay, a lot of people think, well, they must be involved in the lawsuit by the citizens that say they want to put this on the ballot. No, they're not even in the lawsuit, and yet they got subpoenas saying we want to know what you said in your sermons, which again has no relevance. And what's great is, number one, I'd say it's wonderful to have a U.S. senator like Ted Cruz who not only will speak out, but really lead on this. I mean, Ted is the one who called that press conference, asked me to be a part of it. What Senator Cruz did is, everybody said, yeah, well, it's kind of, most senators would be on that side. They wouldn't lead like that. And that's because before he ever thought about running for office, he was a volunteer attorney with us. I mean, he was doing religious freedoms work. He's cared about it his whole life. His father's a pastor. So that's very nice as well. And the Attorney General for the state of Texas issued a very strong letter to the city attorney down there. I'll just read you a couple of quotes. He says, whether you intend it to be or not, your action is a direct assault on the religious liberty guaranteed by the First Amendment. And then towards the end, he says, wow, your stated intention to wait for further court proceedings falls woefully short of the urgent action needed to reassure the people of Houston that their government respects their freedom of religion and does not punish those who oppose city policies on religious grounds. Very strong for the Attorney General of a state to do something like this in public and send a letter right to the city attorney saying what you're doing is wrong. So it's nice to have people that you elect or that you put in office that actually will stand for these things.
Let's go back to the press conference just for a minute. I thought you already had a chance to hear from Senator Ted Cruz, but I thought you'd probably like to also have a chance to hear from Kelly Shackelford.
No government, individual, or entity should ever demand a pastor's sermons by force of contempt of court. It's blatantly unconstitutional, it's immoral, and in a free society, it's disgusting. The city should withdraw their demands immediately, not narrowing the scope. They should withdraw their demands immediately. And any public official who does not act immediately to do so should resign and is not fit to serve in any office in the state of Texas.
Wrong there, Penna Dexter.
This is about city officials attempting to silence the church. It's a very serious issue, and I think it deserved a very serious response, and it actually got one.
Well, Kelly, it seems to me that maybe they are backing down a little bit. What have you found so far?
From what I can see, I don't think they're backing down. I think they're doing what they've done throughout this whole process, which the mayor comes out and does something outrageous and then says something completely the opposite, like she's going to do the opposite, and then she flips right back to what she really wanted to do. And this is a good example of that. I mean, when the pushback first came, the mayor's first response was, well, I didn't know. This was by some volunteer attorneys that were, some of the big law firms have donated their time to defend the city because it's pro, GLBT. And so she first expressed ignorance. Later that night in her own tweet, she said, she wasn't pushing herself away. There she's kind of distancing herself, right? Then later that night, she sends out a tweet that says, well, it's the pastor's fault because they talked about, this issue in public and therefore they're, quote, fair game. Mm-hmm. Again, like somebody's got a scope rifle on some animal they're about to shoot. So they flip back and forth. The latest has been, well, they agree that it might be a little overbroad, and so they're going to reword it to make it more narrow. They still don't get it.
That's what you were referring to about narrowing the scope. Yeah,
it doesn't matter how narrow they make it. I mean, okay, we only want 10% of the words of the pastor's sermon, or we only want some of your private communications with your congregation. I mean, it's totally inappropriate, zero. And that's why both Senator Cruz and myself said that nothing is acceptable here except for complete withdrawal of these subpoenas. But again, they're not showing any signs that they're going to do that. I think they're much likely going to try to see if they can rework it where they can still force the pastors to turn things over. And one of the things I said in the press conference is, I mean, let's think again about this country. People came here on boats for religious freedom. They were fleeing a tyrannical king who didn't like the sermons they were preaching. And that's why America was founded. So for this type of thing to occur, it's not anything like what America is about. It's closer to what happened in Nazi Germany. When they had the order, requiring all pastors to moderate what they had to say, and that people wanted copies and were sitting in and listened to their sermons. There's nothing. It's much more similar to that than it is what this country is all about. So it's something that has to be rejected in whole, so it looks like it's going to have to be fought out a little bit.
Might mention that next week we have Eric Metaxas in studio. Today he wrote "Hand Over Your Sermon or Else," but of course he also wrote about Bonhoeffer, and so I'm looking forward to that interview. We're going to be talking about his new book, but I'm sure he'll have a few things to say about the Houston pastors' issues and the similarity he's seen as he has researched and written about Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
As you look at what's happened here, I agree with Kelly. I think that it's going to go forward. They're not going to back down. They're not going to pull this, because the reason I think it is because it's their strategy. They want to. They overwhelm. The left likes to overwhelm the average citizen, either with burdensome regulations. Here, it's burdensome requests for information from people that shouldn't even have to turn anything over. They're trying to squelch the referendum process, which is a very populist oriented, citizen-oriented process. They're trying to squelch that. They're trying to intimidate pastors to get them back in the churches and out of the public square. And so, they'll keep going in the face of criticism. They will. They don't care.
Well,
one of the things I heard when I was down there is that because this is Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. Everybody's in outrage over this. A number of the Democratic representatives were actually going, allegedly, to the mayor and to those around her and begging her to pull this down, that elections are coming up,
yes,
and she is motivating people to go vote, that like pastors and their congregations that they don't want to encourage.
Two of the largest mega churches in the country are in Houston. So, you start thinking about that. And since we're coming to a break, let me just use that as a good segue into the fact that we have our election resources up there, Pray, Organize, and Vote. And if you go to the resource documents, you'll find Kelly Shackelford's famous piece, Churches and Elections, because sometimes churches wonder, well, how political can we get? What kind of things can we do in terms of passing around voters' guides and things of that nature? And then if you go to our voters' guides, we have what I have actually figured out after looking at everybody else's website, probably the most complete list I've ever been able to find of all the different voter guides. Every single one of the family policy groups associated with Focus on the Family is there. We have American Family Association. We had Ralph Reed this last week. We have his congressional scorecard. We have the Family Research Council scorecard. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And so you will find individuals that will actually provide you with lots of information so that you can make some decisions. And this is a good example where elections have consequences. I suspect the next time the mayor runs for re-election, a lot of pastors that maybe didn't say a thing about the election might mention it, simply because they saw that who's in office can really affect what happens in your church. We'll take a break, and we'll take some of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is our weekend edition. We'll take your phone calls. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and let's stay in the state of Texas here for a minute. KCTA, back down there in the Corpus Christi area. But, John, I'd love to get your comments.
Hey, this is Brother John here in Corpus. I have oh man, I could go on for 30 minutes here. I could say this one thing, that God has predestined a church that he will present to himself, white and adornment, and she is sinless and spotless from this world. And I can tell you this, he has answered all the cries of his people when they cry out unto him. And I want to just give a shout out. I don't really have an opinion. I think we've covered all the lines. It's time for action. I want all these ministers in Houston and around and about to know that I myself and I'm a affiliated pastor. It's fairly large organization, and I think that we're all ready, if need be, to stand in support of these pastors, ministers who are being persecuted for their faith purposely, to push an agenda or to push a lifestyle or to do whatever they want to do. The early church was persecuted. The latter church will be persecuted. We will prevail, and the Spirit will prevail. And programs like this are just awesome.
Thank you. I think we need to stand in solidarity with these pastors in Houston right now. Kelly, it sounds like that battle's not over yet.
Yeah, I think one of the things, actually during the press conference, it came up that, although what's going on here is horrible, certainly God can use it for good. And I think one of the main ways is to help pastors realize that they need to, they actually need to wake up and get involved. I mean, these pastors down there certainly know it, but I think it was a wake-up call to pastors around the country. I think sometimes pastors think, well, I just mind my own business, keep my head down, and this won't ever come to me. Oh, yes, it will. And so now that pastors are, by the way, this is the second one of these that I've had and run into in the last 3 weeks. We've got a client who preached on the weekends. He actually had a government ask for his sermons.
Yes.
Copy his sermons. So this is not the first time.
I think it's a new strategy. We're going to see more of that.
It's something that we need to wake up for. And I didn't mention this earlier, Kerby, and I need to. If people want to see the press conference, it's only like a minute and a half, I think, we grabbed to the press conference with Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz, and myself. They can go to, when they go to libertyinstitute.org, which is our website, they'll have to click on videos, and then they can see in the videos. It's right at the top of the list. But they can, it's one of those things you can see, you can share with other people. And I think it's at pointofview.net as well.
Right, we have it there, too.
And so I would encourage people to get this and let them see what is going on, number one. But number two, that all these people are together standing their ground and saying, this is not going to happen on my watch.
Your action alert today is to watch it. It's only a minute and a half long. And then to hit the share button and send it to somebody by email, put it on your Facebook page, put it on a blog, send it in some way so that we can educate other individuals. Penna, I think if nothing else, we are in a battle, and we're going to have to stand with those pastors that have been willing to stand behind Ted Cruz and Kelly Shackelford.
I love John's encouragement because he talked about the church being the body that God will present to himself. And, God is in this. And we have to remember that. And I think, pastors, they preach that from their pulpits, that God is with you through your problems and your issues. Well, the church is the tool, and it's really because we have the Holy Spirit, we have the strength to oppose these evil things in our culture, in our cities or whatever. So they know that. The left knows that. The other side knows it. And so they proactively come against the church. And in this case, it was almost because these pastors weren't even involved in the suit. They know where the opposition is coming from. And so, it's not exciting for some people to be in these battles. Others of us like the battle because we see that it has national repercussions.
Right.
But some people don't. They don't want that. But, if you have to be in it, if you're going to be a Christian and you're drug along to be in this battle, just remember, God is with you. And the Holy Spirit is there to do this. Christians have fought persecution throughout the generations ever since the time of Christ. And we're doing it now. And we have God's power on our side.
Let's take another phone call. KJRT. James, thank you for calling. You're on with Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford.
All right, guys. Hey, guys, I sure appreciate you guys' program, and it's been great. It's been a blessing in my life ever since back in the day with Marlon Maddox. But I want to tell you guys, you know, the Bible says we fight not against flesh and blood, but principalities and evil spirits in high places. And I really believe that this fight, even though the pastors are there and the fight is showing against these pastors, I really believe that the fight is really against God. There's a fight between good and evil is always trying to raise its ugly head to try to put down the church, to try to put down what God is doing. And I believe that the fight is between Satan and God. And God is going to win this fight. He's never failed.
I read the last chapter, so I know who wins. Good line.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with James, but I want to say, let's make sure we see what is the tactic usually of Satan. It's usually lies and fear. And so that's why it really is important when, instead of cowering, instead of going, well, as a Christian, I don't want to make a fuss or I don't want to cause any trouble, why it's important that these pastors didn't succumb to that kind of intimidation and fear and lies about what their rights and their freedoms are, so that they can do exactly what God called them to do without any sort of fear. And essentially, by stepping up, they said, we're not falling for the intimidation, Satan. And that's what's required of all of us individually. If we're going to have an impact, there are going to be times when we're about to have an impact, when we're going to be tested, and there's going to be fear. Whether you're sharing your faith with somebody, or it could be any situation, and that's always the test, right? Are you willing to be faithful despite the enemy coming at you with fear? And that's what an example the pastors are setting by what they're doing here.
It's fun too to see, because throughout the Bible we read stories of how God raised people up to be in high places, and I see that in Ted Cruz. God just put him where he is. It was unlikely that he would even be the nominee to be U.S. Senator, but he's now in the Senate. And, this man that God has raised up, as Kelly mentioned earlier, his heart is to fight for religious liberty. That's his core, that's one of his core values. And, he's also great on every conservative issue that we care about.
Yes.
He can explain them all. But, that God would raise him up, and that he would, that man is everywhere. He doesn't let an issue go by without commenting on it. And he'll get on a plane and be there when he needs to be, which is what he did this week. And so, we're so grateful that when we see people, he's raised up people like Kelly to go, and that's, the calling that Kelly has is to protect religious liberty. But it's cool to see how someone has been put in government, and then they're raised up to deal with these things.
Absolutely. And same thing with the Texas Attorney General, and what he did. Again, a lot of attorney generals wouldn't do that.
That's true.
But what he did, he was very emphatic and very clear. And I think, that's what's going to be required these days. There's sort of a, what is it? There's a shamelessness with what people want. It's like, I'll just do what I can get away with. And they're just pushing the envelope. And basically, if people don't say no, then we turn around and the country's different than it was, just an hour ago, because there are freedoms that have been given away because somebody just figured they would just, go way over the line and see if anybody did anything.
We're going to take a break, but for those of you that are listening online, or those of you that have access to a computer, we always play the commentary by Penna Dexter, this one entitled Steadfast Opposition, and it really has to do with the decision. Of course, we've already talked about it before, but we want to come back to it again. The decision by the Supreme Court not to hear some of those cases out of various states in which you've had federal judges strike down those various laws that were actually, in most cases, amendments to the state constitution defining marriage between one man and one woman. And Penna, after we come back from the break, I'd love to talk about that a little bit too, because this is a broader issue. What is happening in Houston is one example of a broader issue of the advance of the homosexual agenda, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very true. And we have people also in high places on the other side who are advancing this, and they're abusing their power to do so.
So we're going to do that. And for those of you that have a chance to hear it, you can certainly go online, because we always play it at this time during the broadcast. If not, you can go to our blog and go down the right corner there, and you will see we've already posted it there, so you can read it. And again, it is something we're going to add to the conversations we're talking today about homosexuality. We will later, of course, get to the issue of Ebola, the Ebola crisis, and of course, we recognize we're in the midst of an election, so we'll have some comments about that. Don Federer this week was saying, you can't win something with nothing, or, you have to have a positive presentation. Kelly said that before, and he said that, and we talked a little bit about that with Ralph Reed this week, so we'll get to those issues as well. But we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll take some more phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. It is our weekend edition, an opportunity for us to explain some of the issues, but also a chance for us to hear from you. We will do that right after this.
The United States Supreme Court is staying on the sidelines for now regarding state laws forbidding same-sex marriage. The court decided not to decide yet whether states have the right to protect true marriage and eschew the counterfeit. Appeals courts have overturned several states' laws protecting natural marriage. Recently, the Supreme Court declined to consider reversing them. This has the effect of permitting same-sex marriage in 5 states: Utah, Oklahoma, Virginia, Indiana, and Wisconsin. In these states, citizens voted to define marriage as the union between one man and one woman, and to prohibit same-sex marriages from taking place in their states. The court's decision not to protect these states' marriage laws could also force the redefinition of marriage in 6 other states covered by the 4th, 7th, and 10th Circuit Courts of Appeal. Last year in United States v. Windsor, the Supreme Court struck down part of the Defense of Marriage Act, ruling that same-sex marriages must be recognized by the federal government in states where it's legal. But the High Court left in place the provision that allows states to prohibit same-sex marriage if they want to. Since that ruling, dozens of federal and state judges have pushed the envelope, striking down states' laws and constitutional amendments meant to keep marriage as it's always been. And appeals courts have so far affirmed these decisions. The High Court is reticent to get ahead of public opinion, which is moving towards support of same-sex marriage at a rate of about 1 to 2% per year. The question is, will that support grow to the point where, as in the case of racial integration, the whole nation comes to agree it's the right thing to do? Or will the controversy endure, with the opposition to redefining marriage remaining static or even increasing again? Is there a persistent, steadfast opposition to same-sex marriage that will not budge? In time, will we see a pro-marriage backlash, similar to what has happened on the issue of abortion? The New Republic's Nate Cohn tackled this in a piece entitled, "As a long-term political issue, gay marriage will be more like abortion than integration." He cites a poll from Pew Research that shows Republican support for same-sex marriage has increased only 7% since 2003. During this time period, the public as a whole has increased its support for gay marriage by 30 points. We hear that young people are more likely to support gay marriage, but just 30% of 18 to 34-year-old evangelicals support same-sex marriage, up from 25% in 2003. Nate Cohn concludes, quote, "If much of the remaining opposition to gay marriage is founded on firm religious and moral beliefs, not bigotry or animus, evangelicals will probably hold out for a long time. If the church steps in with strong theological and practical arguments for marriage, we can reverse the march to same-sex marriage." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, we just had a chance to hear your commentary, Steadfast Opposition, or people can read it on our website, pointofview.net. And it's all about the fact that as you said, the United States Supreme Court decided not to decide. It stayed on the sidelines. We've seen that before, but the ramifications this time for potentially 11 states are pretty significant, aren't they?
Yes, Kelly wasn't surprised that they did decide not to decide, but it's very frustrating that they did, in my mind, because if you look at that, the people voted in all these states, they're fairly conservative states, some of them, like Oklahoma, to protect marriages between one man and one woman, and they were overruled by courts, and the Supreme Court said they're not going to reverse them. Now we're saying, okay, maybe it will happen later, or maybe we'll have a circuit split and they will decide. But meanwhile, it really has a lot to do with the people and how much we speak out, just as in Houston. And so there's this one guy who wrote a piece, and Kelly and I were talking about it off the air last week about, what is the opposition to same-sex marriage going to do? Is it going to remain steadfast? That's why I called it steadfast opposition. Are we going to have a core of people? Have we gotten to the point where we've already reversed the people that are going to move over from opposing same-sex marriage to supporting it? And so are we going to be more like the fights over integration, where it became a national consensus that it was wrong to discriminate?
Right.
Or is it going to be more like the fight over abortion, where actually the national consensus went the other way to protect human life? And so the conclusion of Nate Cohn, and I agree with the conclusion, is that it's probably we're going to have a core of opposition. And if we foster that, if we stir it up, if we encourage the pastors in the pews to preach a theology of marriage and preach the importance of protection of marriage, we actually can turn it around. Right now, there's a lot of momentum behind the same-sex marriage people. But, that's when you get up and you start speaking the truth, and then you let God be in charge of the results.
Kelly, let me come to you for just a minute, but I want to give an assignment to our listeners right now. Get out something to write with, and on one part of your piece of paper, whatever you're writing on, put down 41 million. What does that stand for? Well, we had 41,200,000 people across the country that have voted to recognize marriage as one man and one woman. So 41 million people have, in their various referendums, state constitutions, established that they believe marriage should be between one man and one woman. So one is 41 million, the other is 23. That's the number of the judges that have overturned those votes in 20 states around the country. 41 million trumped by 23 unelected judges. That's got to make your head explode.
Yeah, it's not what judges are supposed to be doing, and it's unfortunate. But to be honest, the judges reflect the people of the country, and so the problem a lot of times is our country has got those kind of understandings of truth being evolving, and the Bible being evolving, and therefore the Constitution's evolving, and so they just make things up. But it's really an abuse of our system. I mean, these issues, these deeply moral public policy issues like marriage and how to define it, and I mean, those are really meant to be played out in the legislative arena, where people can have their say, where people can hear and think of every argument possible, good and bad and way, and people are going to make some bad decisions because sometimes the people are sinful and they don't accept God's principles, but at least it's a full, open process. Instead of some judge going into a back room and saying, I decree this. Yeah. It's really a massive disruption to how our system is supposed to work. Now, I've seen a few articles recently by liberal, pro-same-sex so-called marriage that have said they think this is a very bad idea, too, because they think rather than convince people, they're having it forced on people by judges.
Kind of like the abortion issue was.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think, I do think this is going to be, that's why I think this article and Penna's commentary are very helpful, because having the long-term view, having the view 40 years from now, and that is that when you have something that's moral, that's it's the first institution in Scripture that God creates, and His standard hasn't changed. And so, assuming Christians don't throw out His standard and don't throw out His word, then just like abortion, they're going to stand. And there might have been some erosion in what the numbers are. Now maybe it's 50-50. But the point is, I don't think it's going to erode much more, because those who study the Bible, those who are Christians and actually take their faith seriously, knows what the Bible says about what marriage is. And we can get into all the logical things that don't even need the Bible, that, a man and a woman, different than man, woman, create these little future citizens, and gives a male and female role model. There's just so many wonderful things that anybody could look at God's definition of marriage and see that it is better. But again, rationality out the window for people and common sense out the window. again, Christians do know what God's standard is, and I don't think they're going to chunk it. And so I do think on the long term, this is going to be much more like abortion, and you're not going to see this huge change like you did in some other issues.
I think also we're going to see some sad repercussions of the march to same-sex marriage over the next few years. We will see this played out. And this is another responsibility we have here at Point of View to expose those, because in most of those bad repercussions are for the economy. When you start breaking down marriage, it's bad for the economy because marriage is good for the economy. Married families don't need government support like single families do. The other part is for children. It's not good for children. And so I think that's going to start playing out. And of course, we will have to help it play out because the major mainstream media won't. So we'll have to. But anyway, as that starts happening, and I think we saw that with abortion too, we may see, the support for same-sex marriage may erode a little bit, or at least not grow anymore too. So I think that could happen. I mean, unfortunately, you have to be so patient in politics. You fight and you don't see sometimes the outcome quickly. But that doesn't mean you don't fight.
Again, I do commend to you the commentary by Penna Dexter, Steadfast Opposition. I think it'll be an encouragement to you and help you understand the long view. Let's go to Ricky in Louisiana, KPAE. Ricky, what would you like to share with us today?
Kind of reiterate what I said the other day. To whom much is given, much is required. Joel Osteen has the largest church in North America, right in Houston proper, downtown Houston, 50,000 members.
Was he at the press conference?
No, he wasn't at the press conference. Yeah, we know. Go ahead.
His church alone could vote the mayor and the entire city council out of office with 50,000 members. Just like T.D. Jakes in Dallas with 25,000 members told his whole congregation to vote for Obama. At least the Devils crowd has a backbone. They hey, we want you to vote for Obama. So why can't Joel Osteen? Now, of course, maybe it's a wake-up call. In the way, like what Kelly said, I'm kind of glad this kind of happened because you won't be able to sit on the sidelines. I mean, Joel won't be able to say everything's peach and cream, let's just all be happy, because they might close this church down.
Sure. Well, and, I can mention Ed Young and some of the others. Like I said, you got a couple of mega churches, two very large ones in the top 10, but then you look at some of the other mega churches. I'm just thinking, Kelly, in the next elections, and including this one coming up, but certainly when you talk about the re-election of the mayor, a lot of pastors that probably did sit on the sidelines, I'm not so sure they're going to this next time.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, I think it's in about a year. I think they have their elections in the off years. And again, in addition to the mayor, they're city council members.
City council.
So no matter what the mayor would want to do, if the city council were to vote differently, they would have to do whatever that majority voted. So certainly that's one thing. And I wish Joel Osteen had been there with the other pastors. He wasn't. He's not known for sort of those kinds of public stands on those kind of issues. But like you say, you either stand or eventually, it's the old, that they came for the, you name it, right? Mm-hmm. And they came for the gypsies. I wasn't a gypsy, and they came, and then eventually you're the only one left. And when they come for you, there's nobody to stand with you. So this is one of those real wake-up calls to pastors, and I don't think just in Houston. I mean, I think nationwide, pastors are seeing this, and it's a wake-up call to a lot of pastors. They don't understand until they see some of this that, you know what, you're not going to be left alone. So you might as well just be obedient, stand out in public and be obedient, not to make a show, but to stand for God's word, his truth, and realize that sometimes that's going to mean people are going to confront you.
Next week, we have Louis Gomert in studio. We have Eric Metaxas in studio. Can you imagine all things they're going to be saying as well? We're going to take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. We'll take some of the calls left over from the first hour as we talked about the Houston pastors, but we will move on to the issue a little bit later in this hour, to the Ebola crisis. You might want to go to our Facebook page or our website. I've posted what I call a 5-point plan to deal with the Ebola crisis, so we'll put that out there to get your comments either online or on the air. And if you want to agree or disagree, we certainly do welcome your phone calls. But let's take a few more phone calls. I especially wanted to get to this one here. KCTA in Texas. Nell, I think you're going to talk about what is happening in Europe. Please educate us if you could.
Well, my comment was what happened under communism in Czechoslovakia. I lived in Europe and in a free country adjoining Czechoslovakia. I've been in Czechoslovakia under the reign of communism.
Wow.
The pastors there had to submit their sermons to a religious office before they could preach them.
Before. Now, Houston hasn't asked for them before yet, but... Yeah, and I've been in Hungary many times. Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, they had to submit it. They had to pass a certain kind of test, and anything that was deemed inappropriate, you would get kind of one warning, and the next time you just wouldn't show up in the pulpit, right?
Yes, they weren't allowed to preach them. If this officer found anything objectionable to the government. So this is what our country's headed for unless we're careful. Because Obama, we know, is a socialist, and what is that? It's almost communism.
Sure. You know, we've had other individuals, Penna, you know as well as I do, a lawyer that was in Romania that's come here. There have been all sorts of individuals over the years that have warned us about that. Kelly, I'm thinking of also when we've had various individuals from the UK, Paul Diamond and others, say, what I'm seeing in your country is what we saw happen in our country. I want to warn you not to let you head down the same road and end up in the same consequences that we find ourselves in.
No, that's exactly right. And again, as I said, when you ask yourself, if somebody would have said, "I'm going to give you something that happened, you tell me what country," and then they said the government is demanding, with threat of jail, that pastors turn over copies of their sermons that they've given. You'd immediately say, "Well, Nazi Germany with the muzzling order." Which was exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. You'd never guess, not just the United States, but Houston, Texas. Okay, that wouldn't be near the top of your list, and so it really is a wake-up call. And again, it's not the only time. I mean, we were on 2 or 3 weeks ago talking about a new case that we have at Liberty Institute with a wonderful man. African-American, PhD, MD, and was offered to be the director of public health for the state of Georgia. We now have emails from them to each other that we discovered.
The two states?
The state of Georgia.
And the state of California?
No, just with themselves in Georgia, saying, number one, they ask him for his sermons.
There we go.
And then you see them saying, well, I'll do 6, you do 6. I mean, literally, the government bureaucrats are splitting up his sermons and who will read through,
vet him. Yeah.
And then they fired him. not because of anything he did at work, because they're snooping through his sermons and didn't like his theology on marriage being a man and a woman.
He's just a lay preacher.
Yeah, he's just. I mean, there's a lot of people around the country, right? You know, they maybe they don't have a full-time pastor, or different people get a chance to preach. So, I mean, the scary thing is what's happening in Houston. This is the second time I've seen it in the last 3 weeks.
It's amazing.
From the government asking for sermons of people.
You mentioned Georgia. Let's go to this call real quickly. I think Britt, KVAX, you wanted to talk about another case in Georgia that we need to know about. So why don't you educate us?
Yeah, well, I'm sure many of you probably heard about the high school, I think it's in Madison County, where someone had donated privately like a monument or statue that has the Excalibur sword, and the young football players would run out of the football like their locker room and touch this sword.
Sure.
And some group out of Minnesota or somewhere, the guy called and decided that Wisconsin, he decided that they wanted to sue him. And what saddened me about it is I'm a campus minister. I work with young people, and I saw the young man on Fox News this morning say, well, it was kind of okay. We understand their point of view, and we're going to just go through it because, which is the real tragic part, is we can't afford to fight the lawsuit.
And
that's what...
Britt, let me tell you something, because I heard about that this morning too, and the thing that I really didn't like about that was untruthful. For instance, Liberty Institute offered. I mean, we're free, and we were talking to them, offering. I'm sure other people probably did too, but we were. And so to go out and say you can't afford it, they just didn't want to stand.
Yeah.
And so that's the great news sort of right now is these attacks are coming. The good news is people will have people stand with them. I mean, they don't have to go out and hire a team of attorneys. That's why groups like Liberty Institute is here. And I was really sad to see not only did they not stand, but then for them to go out and say they couldn't afford it. Which that's a cop-out.
Let's take another story that I mentioned when you guys were out, but let's come back to it. I know this goes back a few weeks ago, but remember Arkansas State and the concern about whether or not they could have a cross on the back of their helmet. And they said, well, if you just take part of the cross off and it looks like a plus sign, then that's okay. But we did talk about the fact that, again, because of your involvement, you were able to win that victory.
Yeah, and I'm really glad Britt called, because we see these examples, and the Arkansas State is another example. I'll tell you, out of the whole team, we only had one player who was willing, who contacted us, was willing to do anything.
Yeah.
And I'm just so thankful for that player, because if that one player hadn't stood up, then they wouldn't have those anymore, and everybody would think this is okay. Instead, because the one player did stand up, we were able to send a letter. And, of course, they backed down, including the Attorney General of the state, and told them that they could put those crosses on their helmet if they so pleased, which is exactly what they should have done. But, I mean, Britt's call is important because we see these things all the time, and do not let your public officials get away with this kind of cop-out.
Right.
Because that's what they're doing. They're just not willing to stand up. And that's where elections and things come into play, because if people aren't willing, then, and you think they should be, then you need to put people in there who are willing.
Let's talk about 2 action items as we come to a break. Number 1, don't let them have this cop-out. But number 2, underscoring all that, don't let Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is just sort of a small mom-and-pop organization out of Wisconsin, intimidate you, right?
Yes. We've had 12 times in a row when they've sent these threatening letters.
Yes.
And we have come to them, and the city or county or school district has said, all right, Liberty, we'll let you help us. Let's send a letter and tell them go jump in the lake. 12 times in a row, they've gone and jumped in the lake. Okay? So this is all about sending a letter and hoping to scare people, boo-boo, Halloween. It's not about what the law is. It's about whether people will fold up like a cheap seat. And unfortunately, that's what happened with the situation that Britt called about. And we need better leaders that are willing to stand. This is the religious freedom that our country was built on.
Jump in the lake. Kind of a technical legal term, but you get the idea. Be right back.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
The influence William Shakespeare had on the English language is well known. In a previous commentary, I talked about the number of words he created or coined. He is also responsible for so many everyday phrases we use. Christina Sturmbentz provides the context for these phrases we often use and forget were from Shakespeare. When we use the phrase catch a cold, we mean that we're getting sick. In one of Shakespeare's lesser-known plays, someone says that he should head straight away for Britain, lest the bargain should catch cold and starve. In other words, if the deal takes too long, it will fall apart. This came to eventually mean someone would get sick. If you say it's all Greek to me, well, you're referring back to a scene in Julius Caesar. Cassius doesn't understand because he doesn't speak Greek. Today it means that you don't understand something because it is foreign or confusing. Someone who is able to take advantage of life's opportunities may have someone say, "The world is your oyster." That phrase of Shakespeare comes from the Merry Wives of Windsor. You have probably had someone say that love is blind. You may not know that the phrase appears in The Merchant of Venice by Shakespeare. Jessica says that love is blind and lovers cannot see the petty follies that themselves commit. Lovers often have the inability to see shortcomings in the one that they love. Someone might say that you have a heart of gold. Well, they're using a phrase from Shakespeare found in Henry V. King Henry disguises himself as a commoner and asks Pistol if he considers himself a better man than the king, and answers using that now common phrase. In order to start a conversation with someone, we explain that we need to break the ice. That phrase can be found in Shakespeare's Taming the Shrew, and if you express your emotions too freely, someone might say that you wear your heart on your sleeve. We find that phrase in Shakespeare's Othello. As we can see, we owe so much of our English language and common everyday phrases to William Shakespeare. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's continue taking your phone calls on many of these issues, but I wanted to put one more on the table. It is Weekend Edition. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and that is we certainly have been following the Ebola crisis. A number of hours ago, I put up what I thought should be a 5-point plan. You can agree or disagree, but it gives you something to react to. We've put it on our Facebook page. We've put it on our website. Just 5 points real quickly: to ban temporarily all flights from the Ebola zone. We have nearly 30 countries that have done that now. British Airways has done that. Why shouldn't we do that? Number 2, secure the border, because one of the questions a lot of people are asking is, what if Ebola lands in Central America? We had the testimony this week from Marine Corps General John Kelly that said if Ebola landed in Haiti or Central America, can you imagine? I mean, we already had 68,000 children basically walk across the border. But imagine how many more would come if they were afraid of Ebola, either if they had it and wanted to get to the United States, where we, in the case of Thomas Duncan, spent $500,000 treating him, or just to get away from it. Number 3, I said, I think it's becoming very obvious after the testimony this week by Dr. Thomas Frieden, that Frieden was certainly not answering a lot of questions, and Peggy Noonan's column this week I thought was very good. She called it double talk, run around, and gobbledygook. So we need somebody that isn't afraid to tell the truth, isn't motivated by political correctness. I have an idea. Dr. Ben Carson. And then 2 more real quickly. More infected patients should be going to the Ebola certified facilities. We have one now, of course, in Bethesda, one in Atlanta. We may eventually run out of beds if this spreads, but at the moment, let's put them in the places where people have the equipment and the training that are necessary. And then finally, bring back, number 5, the troops from Africa. You've had retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General William Boykin, who's been really concerned about that. We even have one doctor that I quote from former president of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons saying, let's just face it, the troops are not used to dealing with communicable diseases. They're going to be tired. They're not going to know what they're going to do. Sooner or later, more of those troops were going to get the Ebola virus. So that's my 5-point plan. Where am I going wrong?
Well, I think it's a good plan on many fronts. And one of them has to do with, it's just amazing to me that this excuse for not having a travel ban is that we won't be able to fight Ebola in Africa if we ban the flights from coming in. And I just, there's a big leap in there. And Ann Coulter wrote about it in her column this time. She was talking about the hearing in Congress and the two people that were testifying, Frieden, the head of the CDC, and another one of his guys there, Mr. Merlin. And she says Merlin explained the travel ban, saying that if West Africans can't fly to America, that would cause the disease to grow in that area and spill over into other countries. So instead of infecting people in surrounding countries, our CDC wants them to come here and infect Americans. It's a terrible epidemic, and they're working on it in Africa, and they do have travel bans into other African countries. They've contained it to 5 countries there. But, for us to say that, it won't work unless we allow them to fly to America is pretty scary logic and reasoning. It's another reason why Frieden needs to go. She says, unfortunately, everything the government says about the disease keeps being proved untrue. And, they talked about how uncommunicable it was, and yet these 2 nurses just here in Texas got it. And they were dressed, they were protected to some degree, maybe not how they are today, but there's a lot we don't know, and these guys don't know how to deal with it or talk to the American people about it. And so we do need some changes here.
Peggy Noonan today wrote about that as well and said that at some point it's kind of like you could get a child to give you a better answer. Imagine if you said, okay, sick people are coming to the door of the house and we're not sure how to make them well. Meanwhile, they're starting to make us sick too. What's the first thing you would do? And she said, well, the children would say, close the door. Or one might say, well, just for a while you figure out how to treat everyone. Or another might say, go outside in protective clothing with medical help. The point is, 11-year-olds would give you a better answer than what you got yesterday in the testimony before Congress.
Yeah, and what I think is exasperating Americans, because the polling is moving, yes, with most Americans saying that the government is not doing what it should be doing to protect Americans, is the lack of any common sense. I mean, anybody knows this guy flew in our country, had Ebola. It takes 21 days for the incubation period, meaning you can't figure out whether they have it. So do you want to put a ban on people that are coming from those countries from coming in the United States? Yes. Instead, what the president's done is we're going to screen people at the airports once they get here. Although, even though we screen them, the incubation period is 21 days, so it probably won't have shown up yet.
Which is exactly what happened. So it makes no sense. I mean, I think everybody is going, what is the issue here? What is the problem? Why is the president so resistant? It reminds me of the same thing with ISIS, right? I mean, why, we're going to destroy ISIS. Everybody says, no, you won't, not by just bombing. You've got to have troops. But it's this weird sort of, it doesn't fit any logic. It's not true. And it's just, but on the Ebola side, it's like, I don't even understand why. I understand Obama's, not real fond of the military and war, and he thinks Americans are bullies and we're responsible for things. So I at least understand why he's resistant to doing the logical thing. But when it comes to this, why? Why not have a ban on the flights? Why? I think it's racism. He's afraid of being. He's afraid, even though he's black, he's afraid of being called a racist because these are African countries.
Even though fellow African countries are doing it to each other for safety reasons.
Yeah, most of the 30 are the ones in Africa, and I think it gets back to some of the things we talk about here on the program. We talk about worldview and we talk about apologetics. The worldview is very important, and that is, if you believe that we are citizens of the world, then you don't have a real strong belief in our sovereignty or protecting our borders. If you believe that open borders are necessary for your donors. And I'm talking about both Democrats and Republicans, because, I mean, this is something where I think we've got open border ideas on both sides of the aisle on that one. If you also are concerned about political correctness and you just want to assure people that there are no dangers because you want to calm them down, but you don't really want to tell them the truth, or you're afraid, as you said, that you might be perceived as xenophobic or racist or whatever phrase you might want to use, that is what trumps that. And that's why I said, if you really want to get, again, I'll give the president partial credit because indeed he's put together a SWAT team to deal with Ebola. He's actually even endorsed and now put forward a czar, although it seems
a political guy.
Very political. But okay. But that's not going to help. You need the right person heading up the CDC, and that's a person that believes that political correctness is killing people. That sounds like Ben Carson. I know he won't get appointed, but you need somebody like that who is willing to tell you the truth. And I think it gets back to the Peggy Noonan column. After all the things that have happened, let's put this in context. Kelly, remind us, the IRS scandal, and we can talk about all the various issues, the issues with the FBI, the Justice Department, the Secret Service. We can go all the way back to Benghazi and on and on and on, not enforcing the Defense of Marriage Act. I don't think people have a real great trust in the United States government anymore.
Yeah, you can, if you like your doctor, you can keep him. Well, no. If you like your plan, you can keep it. Well, no. I mean, they've been lied to so many times that, and then in this case, the lies just defy common sense. And I mean, I'm not feeling sorry for the head of the CDC, but I'm sure he's also following orders with
I think so.
What his position has to be.
You're a very bright man. I don't think he's just willing to go along with that.
Yeah,
you need somebody who's willing to buck the trend.
He looks really foolish because he's being told to do something that's really foolish, and and yet they're lying about it. So you can't believe them. And so this is when you have the CDC, I mean, one of the most important things would be that you can trust what they're saying. If you can't trust what they're saying, then that's probably one of the most dangerous things if you have some sort of dangerous outbreak or epidemic is you can't, they're telling nurses, oh, do this and this and this.
Don't fly when you have Ebola symptoms.
Go ahead and fly. You're only at 99.5. I mean, it's just bizarre, but as you say, it's got to be. There's some sort of mindset here that just defies common sense, but it's a politically correct kind of thing that is fearful of something instead of doing what's obvious for safety.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, these are areas in which these large organizations like the World Health Association or the CDC, I mean, even conservatives sort of look to them as being, having a purpose in this type of thing. Mm-hmm. But the World Health Association was created to deal with epidemics and diseases, but they're more on your cigarette habits or your eating habits now, and the CDC is the same thing. They say they don't have enough money to combat Ebola because they've been dealing with obesity or whatever. So they've lost their way. They're over controlling of people's lives and lifestyle, and so they're not fulfilling the purpose that they had, and that's the problem now. They're doing more harm than good because you're supposed to be able to believe them. We've got to have somebody to believe, but you can't believe them, so it's chaotic.
One of the best pieces I saw this week on the comparison of this to the movie Contagion was by Jonah Goldberg, because in the movie Contagion, the people that are in control, all the government, they're very responsible individuals, but that hasn't exactly played out in real life this time. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour open line if you'd like to join our conversation. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. We've talked about everything from the pastors in Houston, religious liberty, and the Ebola crisis. Let's go back to one of those questions about the Houston pastors, and we'll go to Wes in Georgia. I think you had a question or two.
Yes. First of all, I really appreciate your show. Thank you. You guys really mean a lot to us personally. God bless you.
Well, thank you.
My question to you would be about the accountability that we've talked about. These elected officials will get in, particularly with a progressive agenda, and they will infiltrate, realizing that there is no personal accountability, except for elections. And what I mean is immediate accountability. And that is a concern of mine, and wondering, when Houston has to foot the bill for this lawsuit, which will obviously fail, why can't there be some personal assets that are involved there, for the mayor and other kinds of accountability to prevent folks like that getting in and causing the city at large to lose and the country at large to lose?
No, it's a great question, and it's a real problem. There's a doctrine that has really been created by judges in the courts called sovereign immunity, and it violates everything about why this country was founded. This country was founded. What the number one slogan by people in this country was "No king but King Jesus," and but this about 100 years ago or so. In the courts, they started to develop this thing they called sovereign immunity, and that is that if you're a government official, then citizens aren't allowed to sue them unless they give their permission. So unless there's like a state statute or whatever, right, they're not personally liable. And we've given them all this shield, and the argument is, well, people need to be free to do their jobs, like police officers and everybody else. Well, should my doctor be free to do his job? I mean, you can sue the doctor, but what this does is it means that there's no personal responsibility. It means that somebody can abuse their office, and the way it works is you can bust that what's called qualified immunity if no reasonable official would have known, or every reasonable official would have known that they were violating a clearly established constitutional right. And so it's a huge hurdle to get over. And I do think that the government would be much more responsive to the people.
Oh, sure.
If they were like everybody else. I mean, for instance, if you slip out in front of the government, you have to get their permission to sue them. If you slip next door and it's your business, you get sued. I mean, it shouldn't be different. And when there's personal responsibility, people take more responsibility for what they do. And the government's a lot more accountable, but that is a problem.
I do understand the value of it in some ways for elected officials. Could imagine how progressives could just completely tie down Ted Cruz by bringing suit after suit after suit after suit on a position he took or something like that. But at the same time, we've gone so far the other direction that you have no responsibility in government, and the only way we can show you responsibility is either by defeating you at the polls or impeaching you. And I think there is some problem that needs to be addressed. Penna?
The way that that certain elected officials abuse their power to gain certain things for themselves was illustrated, I think, sharply here in Houston, because the mayor, I think most people realize that she is a lesbian. She's actually married in California to a lesbian partner. So at least from that state, we don't have to recognize it in Texas. So this non-discrimination law that they passed there, that their city council passed, I mean, this is something she's pushed. And she even admitted it, saying, it's all about me. She said that.
Yeah.
And so this has become personal to her. And she's wreaking havoc on the state and on our religious liberties. And yet it is kind of sad that we can't really do anything to go after her for that abuse of power. I mean, she's abusing her office in so many ways and allowing these subpoenas of pastors, communications and sermons. And it's for an agenda. It's for really her personal lifestyle agenda that she thinks is, she's one of the tools to push that.
I thought the two things that I found just amazing quotes by the mayor of Houston was that quote, that it's all about me, which is, you're supposed to be a public servant.
Yeah.
It's never supposed to be all about you. And then number two was the quote that pastors and their sermons are fair game if they've been on the opposite side of an issue than her. Fair game for subpoenas. Two incredible admissions. I mean, I think connected, right? It's all about her. It's so personal that the attack is abusive, violative of the Constitution because it's personal. But those admissions, I mean, the fact that somebody would be that way is one thing. The fact that they would, say that and be very open about it is incredible for a public official.
And this is another thing that I think is, we can look at this as a fortunate occurrence in a way, because a lot of people make the argument that homosexuals are they can be just as qualified as someone else to hold this position, to work in this job, to be a congressman, to be a mayor. And so when she was elected, she was not elected to advance the homosexual agenda in Texas. That's not why the people of Houston elected her. But yet she is doing that. She's using her power to do that. And that happens a lot across the country. So I think that the story being told about her doing that is another good story to help us in other battles across the nation.
And let's be clear about something. They did polls of the people in Houston on whether they wanted this piece of legislation. It's like 80-something% of the people said no.
No, yeah.
And they passed it anyway. And so the people respond by what
They're
their law
supposed to be
says.
Representative, supposed to represent, right?
So they had this procedure for getting on the ballot so the people could vote. So instead of 17 signatures, they provided 50,000, and then they still refused it. But the interesting thing about these bathroom bills, these transgender or sexual identity bathroom bills, none of them has been voted on.
That's true.
Okay, they're all being pushed through
Commonwealth
by
of Massachusetts,
legislature
California.
in California.
Yeah, and
things like that.
so
Very true.
I think one of the things that's going on here is if this thing is voted on in Houston, we know what's going to happen, and that would be the first time it's voted on. So, which would probably have an impact across the country.
That's probably why they don't want it voted on.
Which is why they're going to such really lawless lengths in order to avoid the right of the people to vote on this issue under their city charter. So, but I think very few people think about that. Everybody knows these are crazy bills. They've never been passed, by a vote of the people. It's always a very obviously special interest that's pushing through something that the people haven't voted for.
Well, an example I gave just a few minutes ago, remember I talked about put 41 million and then next to it 23. 41 million people voted for various state constitutional amendments that would actually define marriage as one man and one woman. And in 20 of those states now, they have been overturned by 23 judges. And that doesn't strike us as very fair. At least I'll give partial credit to Maine. At least they did have a vote and brought it in. I may disagree with that, but at least it was a political process. And again, what I say to my liberal friends out there and our listeners, because many of them are liberal as well, is do you really want it turned around? I mean, let's suppose indeed all these pastors get a very conservative mayor in Houston. Do you want them, whoever that new mayor in Houston, to go after homosexual establishments and subpoena them? Of course you don't. Do you want a situation where your next president of the United States decides that we will, against the rulings of the courts, implement all sorts of things or put all sorts of really conservative justices who, with a stroke of a pen, change what the will is of some of the people in various states? Would you feel okay if a governor in Maine was to overturn all of the vote that came in the state of Maine on same-sex marriage? Think about that for just a minute. Right now, liberals kind of like how the judges are coming their direction and how some of these unelected officials and some of these elected officials are coming there. But, that can go both ways. What's sauce for the liberal goose can also be sauce for the conservative gander, can it?
It can. And, that's really true. And I think some of the thinking liberals, the thinking gays like Andrew Sullivan out there are upset with those tactics because they see what's going on. They're thinking down below the issue that they want to see moved forward to the principle of how it's done.
Jonathan Turley at George Washington University, he's been very concerned, Kelly, about the fact that this is a lawless president And I'm sure if he was looking at what's happening in Houston, he'd just be appalled, because even if he agrees with transgender or same-sex marriage, he'd just say the process is wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, again, what these people tend to think that when they can let the government abuse its authority because it's their issue. But what they don't understand, that is not really about their issue. That is about a new power you just gave the government to do that on anything.
Right.
And if you have any foresight at all, you realize it'll be against whatever you care about next time.
Well said. Let's take a break. We have quite a number of phone calls. We'll get to those as best we can. And if we don't have time today, don't forget, next week we've got Eric Metaxas, we got Louis Gomer, we got all sorts of people in studio. We'll be talking about some of these issues. We'll be back right after this.
The United States Supreme Court is staying on the sidelines for now regarding state laws forbidding same-sex marriage. The court decided not to decide yet whether states have the right to protect true marriage and eschew the counterfeit. Appeals courts have overturned several states' laws protecting natural marriage. Recently, the Supreme Court declined to consider reversing them. This has the effect of permitting same-sex marriage in 5 states: Utah, Oklahoma, Virginia, Indiana, and Wisconsin. In these states, citizens voted to define marriage as the union between one man and one woman, and to prohibit same-sex marriages from taking place in their states. The court's decision not to protect these states' marriage laws could also force the redefinition of marriage in 6 other states covered by the 4th, 7th, and 10th Circuit Courts of Appeal. Last year in United States v. Windsor, the Supreme Court struck down part of the Defense of Marriage Act, ruling that same-sex marriages must be recognized by the federal government in states where it's legal. But the High Court left in place the provision that allows states to prohibit same-sex marriage if they want to. Since that ruling, dozens of federal and state judges have pushed the envelope, striking down states' laws and constitutional amendments meant to keep marriage as it's always been. And appeals courts have so far affirmed these decisions. The High Court is reticent to get ahead of public opinion, which is moving towards support of same-sex marriage at a rate of about 1% to 2% per year. The question is, will that support grow to the point where, as in the case of racial integration, the whole nation comes to agree it's the right thing to do? Or will the controversy endure, with the opposition to redefining marriage remaining static or even increasing again? Is there a persistent, steadfast opposition to same-sex marriage that will not budge? In time, will we see a pro-marriage backlash, similar to what has happened on the issue of abortion? The New Republic's Nate Cohn tackled this in a piece entitled, "As a long-term political issue, gay marriage will be more like abortion than integration." He cites a poll from Pew Research that shows Republican support for same-sex marriage has increased only 7% since 2003. During this time period, the public as a whole has increased its support for gay marriage by 30 points. We hear that young people are more likely to support gay marriage, but just 30% of 18 to 34-year-old evangelicals support same-sex marriage, up from 25% in 2003. Nate Cohn concludes, quote, "If much of the remaining opposition to gay marriage is founded on firm religious and moral beliefs, not bigotry or animus, evangelicals will probably hold out for a long time. If the church steps in with strong theological and practical arguments for marriage, we can reverse the march to same-sex marriage." For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, weekend edition here on Point of View. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. We have covered quite a lot today, but I thought just before we wind down today, we might talk about this election. And Kelly, one of the articles we posted was one that you brought my attention to. We've mentioned it earlier in the week when we had Ralph Reed on by phone, and it's from Don Feder. Don Feder's, of course, written for the Boston Herald for years. Very, very articulate individual, but I love it. It says, "Republicans betting they can beat something with nothing." And I thought that really does sound like Kelly, because it's got lines in here like, "Join us for Sunday worship." Why? Well, we'll get back to you after we check our focus group. "Shop at Macy's. We're not Gimbals," and on and on and on. And Kelly, that's what you've said. You cannot beat something with nothing. And you said a couple of weeks ago on our Friday weekend edition that the Republicans and the conservatives and the pro-life and pro-family candidates out there are missing an opportunity. They should nationalize the election. And when you look at a state, oftentimes Democrats win. When you look at the bigger issues or the national election, that's a way in which a lot of these pro-life, pro-family candidates can win.
Yeah, you would think that people would be. I think the Democrats have looked at history, and they understand that these races need to be local. The last thing, they would never nationalize these U.S. Senate elections. But why the Republicans aren't doing it is just beyond understanding. It's hey, these guys are really screwing up on the other side, so we're just going to stall. Yeah. It's like in basketball, we're going to stall.
The four-corner offense.
Yeah, the four-corner.
We never did that in a basketball team, but I don't think it's a very good strategy.
Well, it's a really bad strategy if you have to score to win.
Yes.
And so, yes. And that's what he's saying is you don't win, and even with, I don't care who the candidate is, nobody ever wins because the other guy is just so bad. People will not vote against. You always have to have the positive, right, I want to vote for that person or that stance. And that's what they're not offering that. And especially when it's been teed up on, I think, an issue that Americans really do. National security is the number one issue, I think, right now for Americans, whether it's Ebola, whether it's ISIS. I mean, and they feel like there's great incompetence in the current administration, in the government. And it'd be really easy to make to nationalize that and to simply say, if you want the same approach, vote for the same party. If you don't, here's what we would do.
Right.
And lay that out. It would combine all those Senate races, but they've decided not to do that. They think they can stall the ball. And I think it'll cost them in the election. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, the probably one of the biggest races here to watch is Kansas. Right. Because there you have not even the Democrat pulled out because,
so Greg Orman could be the, quote, independent, but we know he will caucus with the Democrats.
And basically the people in Kansas, I mean, they're even conservatives. They're saying, I'm not going to vote for, Roberts. Well, they're basically probably deciding who gets the Senate. And that'll probably decide whether, if Republicans do really well everywhere else, if they lose Kansas, they're probably going to lose the Senate because of somebody who's an independent. Name me the last independent who caucused with Republicans.
Yes, I can't think of a one.
It never works out that way for some reason, Yeah.
This is where there's people in our movement that are such purists that they actually cut off their nose to spite their face, and that's what's happening in Kansas. It's pretty sad because you've got to hold your nose sometimes. Roberts has been a moderate, and yet he's tacking to the right now. He knows who who the people are. And so, people need to get smart and remember who, if you elect Republicans, for instance, then you're going to have Republican leadership in the Senate. And is that the final goal or is it not the final goal? There's another race that we should be watching, I think. It was brought up today in the Wall Street Journal by Kim Strassel, and it's the Virginia race. Ed Gillespie is running against Mark Warner, and Ed's behind.
And they never gave him a chance, and he is closing.
He's a good candidate, and that's what we need is good candidates, because not only has he run against Obama, that's a part of his campaign. There's a big part, though, he has pulled together, because he's been in the Republican Party a long time.
Sure.
He's a good healthcare reform agenda, for instance, a good economic agenda, a foreign policy agenda. He's put all of it out on the table. The party at the top echelons of the Republican Party are afraid to put anything out there for people to oppose. So they're playing it safe with this, just opposing the liberals. But Gillespie, if he wins, maybe this will teach the party a lesson, because he has been a party guy. But maybe this will teach the party a lesson that you have to have something positive so that you can actually make touchdowns.
Yeah, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the different approaches of the Republicans and the Democrats to appointing Supreme Court justices.
Right.
For how long in our life did we remember that the Democrats would go with, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, head of the ACLU. They would say she's a moderate, and they would push her through, and she would get through and become on the Supreme Court. The Republicans were always, we're going to get a conservative, but not one with a paper trail.
Like Harriet Mier.
And so now, what do you call somebody who's maybe 50 or 60 years old and there's no evidence in their life that they've ever done anything conservative.
A moderate.
They're probably not a conservative. And so the Republicans would appoint these people, and then they'd watch them drift and wonder why. And then all of a sudden you had the Harriet Mier situation. And I think enough of people in the base were sick of this approach. And when, she was offered, they didn't think she was conservative enough and made a stink. And, the president, who loved her a lot, I think, as a person, as a friend, and everything else, woefully, pulled her back. And then offered Sam Alito. He said, it kind of was saying, okay, if you want me to be out there, I'm going to pick a guy with the most history, with statements on Roe v. Wade, and what happened?
He's
on the Supreme Court, okay?
But invited you to come and speak.
The Republicans were always scared of doing, and that reminds me of what's happening here with nationalizing. Even though here they've got a long history. Whenever they nationalize it, they win. Or every time they've won, they've nationalized it, and when they don't, they definitely don't win.
Well, the last time we were able to pick up some people like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee. I don't know if you've been watching some of the others. I'm really impressed with Ben Sass in Nebraska, who's probably going to win. And look at some of these others. So we'll see, But I think it just brings it to one other point that you were talking about, and that is you have people running as moderates or independents when they aren't. And a good example, of course, is in Kansas, but we have something like that in South Dakota, and certainly something like that in North Dakota. Even in Kentucky, you have Allison Grimes, who won't even say whether or not she voted for Obama. We all know the answer to that. And I'm just encouraging our listeners out there to be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Have some discernment here. And one of the best ways to get some discernment is the fact we put those election resources up there. And Kelly, you don't do that as much now. You have Jonathan doing that. But again, you can speak to the fact that these voter guides are so very helpful. And we have links to voter guides in virtually every state. And people can learn a little bit more about where these individuals are in terms of their voting record, if they're an independent, or how they voted, or how they answered surveys if they were candidates. And that's just something I encourage everybody to do in the next 2.5 weeks.
Absolutely. Because even if you know the big race in your state, like let's say there's a race for U.S. Senate in your state, you probably know about that race because it's all over the TV and the media and everything else. But you probably aren't going to know about the ones as you go down ballot. Who's running for state representative? And you're going, oh my gosh, we've got one of those? Yeah, you do. You've got a state house and a state senate. Yeah. And you need to know that. And that information will be provided in the voter's guide, which is very important. The other thing I want to mention is, because I don't know that we've mentioned it in this hour, we talked a lot about the pastor situation in Houston. For those who weren't listening in the first hour, you can actually look at a part of the press conference. We have about a minute and a half, Senator Cruz and myself, and you can see the crowd, the pastors behind us. And so if you want to see a little bit of the press conference, it's kind of neat to be able to see. It's at pointofview.net, and look for the link there. Or you can go to libertyinstitute.org and click, I think it's under news, and then click under videos, and you can see it as the first video.
Let me give you some action items. We're just about out of time. One of those is to go to the election resources and find some of those things and do the research. Number two, go to that video. We have it on our website. We also have it at Liberty Institute. The link is there as well. And watch it, and then hit the share button. Send it to somebody else. And I think you will really be educated about that and educate others. So it's always great to have both of you in studio. And Penn, I know you're heading off to Israel. And
yes, I am.
In a few
Very
days,
excited.
maybe I will be. We're on 2 different tours, but we'll be out for a short period of time. But
I'm
we'll
jealous.
Yes. But just before we go, let me just mention next week, got Tim Elmore, we got Louis Gomer, we got Jim Cymbala by phone. Of course, I mentioned we've got Eric Metaxas in studio, Marilyn Morris, a really good lineup. So I hope you'll join us every single day. But visit the website, pointofview.net. Visit our Facebook page, and we hope that you have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend, and we will see you back here on Monday.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.